What's your experience been like that? I mean, what do you tell people if they're afraid to buy outside of their current market?
Well, it all comes back to that time in jail because I had a daughter in 2001. I woke up, it was actually Christmas Eve when I was coming out of that stupor and realizing that I was not going to be home for Christmas the following day to spend with my daughter. And then spending that next year paying the price to society for what I had done in 2005. So during that time, my daughter and her mom moved with her extended family. We went our separate ways. She moved to Chicago to basically start a new life outside the Philadelphia area. So being a dad to me became weekend visits once a month if I could afford them. Two people would have to fly back and forth. It was like a great day when my daughter was 5 or 6 and she could fly alone on the plane. She'd come for a week or two in the summer. But beyond that, it was not the conventional family story that I at least had in mind when I wanted to have a family when I was younger. So, it was having this like far-fetched, far-flung dream for me and this like driving life need. It was like God's will for me to move to Chicago at some point. And I tried a few times to go out to Chicago and reestablish the real estate thing I had cooking in Philadelphia for years with some success, and had to crawl back from Chicago with my tail between my legs. Didn't get it started. It just didn't work out. So finally in 2014, 2015, it wasn't an opportunity in Chicago as much as it was doing the right thing by my own life and by my family by moving out to Chicago from Philadelphia when I finally had good team members in place, good partners in Philadelphia, where I was confident enough that the risk of that entire thing crumbling was small enough that I could go out to Chicago and then establish myself in Chicago without having to crawl back broke and live with family again like happened before in my life. So it was driven by family.
Welcome to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. And now your hosts, Stephen White and Eric Worrell.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Rent Prep for Landlords. You got Steve and I here as always. How you doing, Steve?
Pretty good.
Doing pretty well myself. So sometimes we do these in the news segments and we kind of just go over some topical things going on that are, pertinent to landlords, property managers, real estate investors. And other times we have on some guests. And today we have a guest.
Yeah, very cool. Very excited to have Daniel Breslin here, who is a real estate expert and author of Become a Wholesale Real Estate Master and Buy and Sell Houses with No Money.
Yeah. And Dan, we just want to thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Absolutely, Steve. Eric, it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the honor to share this time with you and your guests, your listeners.
Yeah, we appreciate you being on the show. And to kind of give a little bit more context, I got a nice little one-pager right here. I'm going to read some of this off here. But so a little bit about Dan. He is the founder and president of Diamond Equity Investments, a real estate investment company that is flipping properties in Philadelphia, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, and Tampa. And Dan, you have been full-time in real estate since 2006, and you average 25 deals per month. So let me ask you, there's 25 deals per month. Are those mostly like wholesales, flips? What's going on there?
Yeah, so it's a little bit higher than that right now. We're in the busy season. I'm sure we did 10 new contracts last week. We've already got like 3 in the door this week. So it's like 50 deals per month now. 20% of those we handpick, select to fix and flip. Fund them, do the contract, new kitchens, new bathrooms, etc., resell them retail and take all the money. The other percentage some percentage beyond that, maybe another 20% are going to be buy them and do minimal rehab and then turn around and sell them, maybe to an investor who's going to do the complete flip. Maybe in this market that we're in right now, it's hot, maybe to a homeowner who's watching HGTV and they're going to flip their own house, but just live there indefinitely and never sell it. And then the remaining 60% or so are going to be wholesale deals immediately sold to somebody else, although we may double close and resell those properties to them.
Okay. Very cool. And we got a little bit of backstory here that we'll get into here because it sounds pretty interesting. And I know Steve and I are definitely curious. So it says here that you kind of got your start. You were actually sitting in a prison cell and you realized that you wanted to get out of these troubles that have kind of been finding you. And you read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by the author Robert Kiyosaki. So we have a lot of guests that have actually mentioned this book being kind of that, that pivot point in their life of changing their perspective and getting into real estate. But bring us back a little bit. What happened? Like, describe that story, that experience of reading that book in a prison.
Well, I was 26 years old, 25, and then 26 in 2006 when I did my first deal. But the entire year of 2005, I was caught in a car after a blackout that was not mine, that I crashed in front of a police officer and then got out and ran from the scene. So I had, the DUI, the car theft charges, etc., all to contend with, from a night I didn't remember. So I used to party. I do not do that. I don't drink. Haven't had a drink in more than 6 years now at this point. Very diligent and strict with my habits when it comes to that as a result of that. But go back in the story a little bit. When I was 17, my dad handed me Rich Dad Poor Dad. I think it was 1997, 98, something like that. And I remember man, my dad was a blue collar worker. He never really, he wasn't setting the world on fire with income, wasn't like a real estate guy, business owner at that time or anything. So I took it like, whatever, he's nuts, I'm not reading it. And then when the book circled back around on the block in jail, which the block there where I was about 95 people in a giant room full of bunk beds. And somebody had passed me Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I paid attention and had the time and no distractions there to read that. And it didn't immediately, it wasn't, oh man, I'm going to go into real estate. Real estate was always like a dream of mine. I thought I would buy it when I eventually saved up enough money to get my first flip. And I came home after that, and it was, get rich in real estate type seminar that we see advertising for and hear on the radio often in every market here in the United States. Mm-hmm. And we went, and, one thing led to another, read a lot of books. And about 6 months later, I did my first wholesale deal and made $6,000, on a house I contracted for $5,500. Tried to fund that deal and could not get anybody to loan me the money to do the rehab, and sold it for $11,500 as a backup plan. 3 weeks later, went to settlement.
Nice. Now I got to ask you, just to backtrack a little bit, the seminar that you went to, did you gain anything from the seminar, or was it a total waste of time?
It was absolutely worth. I think we went to an initial weekend seminar, and that was $1,000 or $2,000. My dad put the credit card up, and I'm shocked. I thought my dad lost his mind because I'd never seen him buy anything that expensive when I was growing up. We didn't have money or means, and here he plunked it down on this real estate thing for me that just came home from jail. I'm still right. There's no license, no money. And we go to the weekend, and then, there was the next level of training, which they sell you on when you go to those events. And they gave us some stuff at that weekend seminar, enough to realize I needed more information. My dad found a guy that we were talking to there. We partnered on a $14,000 package. And then my dad stepped back, and then I went off to Florida with this gentleman, Dave, and, started taking the advanced courses. And to answer the question, I did gain a lot of vocabulary, a lot of knowledge, and I was able to talk about real estate deals, the business at a higher level than the 26-year-old broken Dan Breslin could have done otherwise. And that did gain me the attention of several people who we put a lot of deals together in 2006, 7, 8. Including a business partner that I'm blessed to still be in business with today in the Philadelphia market, where we're flipping 5 properties that are under construction as we speak, waiting to be sold retail. So yeah, absolutely. I got value out of it, and I've made, 10, 100 times my money back at least from what my dad stepped up and put on the table there, act of faith years ago.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a great story too, because I'd say it's probably split down the middle. Some people find some of them a horrible waste of time. Other people come away, like you said, where it gives you the vocabulary, it gives you the interest, maybe the drive, take the next step and keep going with it. But what an incredible story. What a great father too. Is your dad into the real estate stuff with you now, or no?
He literally stepped back, and when I tell him about having to make the deals, he cringed. He's not the best negotiator in the world. He's an HVAC installation and repair mechanic.
Right.
And I had ups and downs since 2006. It wasn't peaches and cream. When the market crashed, I kind of personally crashed as well. And then, come 2011, 2012, that's when I finally put away, the drinking and all the childish habits, as it were. And, it's been an ever brighter day shining in my life since then. But he never really got into the real estate thing with me. He invested some small IRAs with me, and I was, giving him 10% interest, couple points, whatever, doing these small flips just to keep the money working. I paid him back for the seminar. I paid him back one of the IRA things. He bought Bitcoin at the right price, and then he sold out at the right price. And now he's a private investor of mine, doing pretty well consistently. And so far, he's looking like a genius with where Bitcoin
right.
and then is at now as we speak here in July 2018.
I feel like there's a million stories like this. My brother was telling me that somebody had interviewed for his company, and he was married and he had a bunch of Bitcoin. I think he had like 75 of them. And I mean, at one point, Bitcoin was up to 20,000. So that
I hope this isn't a story that he sold at like a stupid time and he lost everything.
No, his wife is his now ex-wife.
Yeah.
I told him, you got to sell this. We need something, blah, blah, blah. So he sold this, he got in way early.
Yeah.
You were talking like $10 a Bitcoin.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And he sold it for like $100 a Bitcoin or something like that. So he got his like $7,000, whatever the math is. Out of it.
Oh, that's a horrible story. That's exactly what I didn't want.
I know.
That's what I meant. Yeah.
Oh my God. It's just like you're being selfish. You gotta just, sell this right now. Get the $700 out of it.
See, I'm the opposite. I saw it at 20,000. I was like, I'm going to hang on to it because who knows, $100,000 maybe. And then I still made out, but not as well as I could have if I would have dumped off at 20,000. That's probably when your dad got out, right? Like when it was peaking.
I think he got in at 1,800 to 1,200, which was like nuts. I'm like, thinking he's lost his mind. He put it all on the line too at that price, and then he got out. I think at like either 12 or 15, something like a great number. Looking back right now, yeah.
Good for him. That's the story I want to hear. I hate hearing the guys who sold it at $100. Oh my God. How does that guy live with himself now?
Yeah. I'm on Reddit a good amount, and I follow some of the cryptocurrency trends on there. And there's people a lot of times they're like, just took out a second mortgage on my house.
Oh my gosh.
I'm going to make billions, you idiots. And I'm like, look, don't put it in writing if you did this.
Right.
Just be humble. And if it works out for you, great. And if it doesn't, you can crawl back into your hole.
Right. Oh my gosh. So, well, I mean, I know we got off onto a tangent there, but it really is a great story. And I love hearing, the fact that your dad invested in you. Really, at the end of the day is what he did. He said, I got to get him moving on the right track. I'm sure it was his mindset. And thankfully he did. Cause maybe you wouldn't have gone to that seminar. Maybe it wouldn't have, set you out on the course that you're on. So,
yeah, I guess to be fair, prior to that, when I was growing up back in like 87, 88, 89, my dad did have his own electrical contracting business, and he was kind of putting things together. And he had a couple of partnerships, and they bought a few rental properties in Philadelphia, where I grew up, where I'm from, where he was born, where he still lives. And I had a paper route at the age of 9 or 10 or 11, however old I was. And I remember having to spend, lots of long nights there as he's renovating these houses, these 2 or 3 rentals that they ended up putting together. Mm-hmm. And he told me what he was doing, told me the price, and then told me how you go to the bank, get the refinance. And his mortgage payment was $175 and the rent payment was $350. And I did the math and I'm like, wow, he's making $175 and I'm like delivering these papers every day, and he never has to go do anything beyond having the rent came in. Like, I'm going to do this someday. Right. He ended up kind of, the market changed at that point. The business he was in went under, and that's why he ended up back at the, the employment situation and never really taking a plunge. And I think that had a huge impact on him in 2 ways. Number one, the risk he took, and then the beating he took for taking that risk. I think that weighed on his mind heavily when he didn't jump back in, both feet the way that I jumped in after that. And then number two, I think he noticed that there were other people he probably knew in his circle. He had done it before. So he had the bug and watched a lot of people, I'm sure, in his life make a lot of money from doing real estate. So he was able to take, those two things, and without him having to be at risk again, he could put me forward, watch me succeed, or watch me fail. Maybe, I don't know what's going on.
Wow,
see the benefit too.
Yeah, I mean, when you're young, you're much more risk proof than when you're older and you got a family, and you're in two different positions there. So he was smart to push you, when the time was right to do it.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Thank God.
Yeah, right.
So Dan, one of the things that I'm interested in learning about is so you're all over the place. I mean, you're investing in Philadelphia, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, and Tampa, like we mentioned earlier. So one of the things that you can discuss is how to expand into new markets and buying and fixing and selling real estate. The reason I find this interesting is right now, I mean, I'm sure Steve can speak to this better than I can because he just went through the house buying process here locally in Buffalo. I mean, it is not a buyer's market right now where we are. So if somebody was looking to get into real estate where we are in Buffalo, it'd be very difficult right now because you'd be paying a premium on a property. So they might think about, wanting to expand into other markets. But I mean, the thought of that to me is, I have real estate here in Buffalo. The thought of buying real estate out of the market scares me. Like that's not something I want to get into. It seems like a lot to manage. I mean, what's your experience been like that? I mean, what do you tell people if they're afraid to buy outside of their current market?
Well, it all comes back to that time in jail because I had a daughter in 2001. I woke up, it was actually Christmas Eve when I was coming out of that stupor and realizing that I was not going to be home for Christmas the following day to spend with my daughter. And then spending that next year paying the price to society for what I had done in 2005. So during that time, my daughter and her mom moved with her extended family. We went our separate ways. She moved to Chicago to basically start a new life outside the Philadelphia area. So being a dad to me became weekend visits once a month if I could afford them. Two people would have to fly back and forth. It was like a great day when my daughter was 5 or 6 and she could fly alone on a plane. She'd come for a week or two in the summer. But beyond that, it was not the conventional family story that I at least had in mind when I wanted to have a family when I was younger. So, it was having this like far-fetched, far-flung dream for me and this like driving life need. It was like God's will for me to move to Chicago at some point. And I tried a few times to go out to Chicago and reestablish the real estate thing I had cooking in Philadelphia for years with some success. And had to crawl back from Chicago with my tail between my legs. Didn't get it started. It just didn't work out. So finally in 2014, 2015, it wasn't an opportunity in Chicago as much as it was doing the right thing by my own life and by my family by moving out to Chicago from Philadelphia when I finally had good team members in place, good partners in Philadelphia, where I was confident enough that the risk of that entire thing crumbling was small enough that I could go out to Chicago and then establish myself in Chicago without having to crawl back broke and live with family again, like happened before in my life. So it was driven by family. And then I got here and I live right on Lake Michigan, and we can hear the waves. It was frozen solid. It looked like something like Antarctica or frozen chunks of ice. So I started Florida basically at the same time. So I'd have like an excuse to travel for business to Florida to check on flips and stuff, which I never really ended up doing too much of that anyway. But then that taught me how to go into other markets. And it took a year and a half, 2 years before I started to identify places I wanted to be, places where the money could be made, neighborhoods to flip, neighborhoods that wouldn't flip no matter what the price. And then I identified Atlanta as a market I wanted to be in because of the market. And then simultaneously, I had somebody in Atlanta who was proving to me that they were going to be a good business partner or potentially a good business partner who was worth taking a risk on. And a similar thing kind of transpired with Miami, where I lived for a short period of time a few years back as well. So that was how I ended up in all those markets.
Well, I think, Eric's question was, how do you find your comfort zone of getting outside of your market? But it makes sense. You got boots on the ground. You're there. You're going to these places and getting it set up. Are you looking when you're there? Do you reach out and try to find partners that are going to stay there and remain there that can run the business while you go back or move to a different market then?
So, yeah. And my goal now at this point is not to be in 10 markets or 20 markets. Like maybe at some point that came down the line. I have been in as many as 6 at one time or 7. So I've gone into some places and failed and found out that, for me to succeed because of what I do, I specialize in off-market deals. We're buying deals directly from sellers. We're either flipping them, we're fixing them up, we're wholesaling, whatever we're doing, keeping them as rentals. But it's all direct to seller for the most part. So for me, I succeed in a larger metropolitan area 5 million people or more, basically within an hour driving distance of wherever downtown is, whatever point that I pick. If there's not 5 million people like Baltimore, Maryland area, there was just like not really enough population around that Baltimore area within that same driving radius where we just didn't find success. I'm sure there's a lot of people who have success in those markets, and some of it may have been the operating partner on the ground why we never succeeded. But for me, it's been much easier to succeed in a larger metropolitan. We do more deals in Miami than we do in Tampa. Both are equally competitive, but Tampa is a little bit of a smaller metropolitan area. So I would suggest, I guess when I'm choosing the market, I chose to be in Atlanta because of the market conditions in Atlanta, and I identified that as a growth and an emerging market that was friendly to business. Compared with Illinois and Chicago, where I'm at now, there's more risk of higher taxes. So if a property goes vacant here in the city of Chicago, it's $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 per year in taxes. The water bills are expensive, whereas in Atlanta, Georgia, a similarly priced property is probably going to have half the property tax, and it's also probably going to have half the risk of the property taxes increasing monumentally as a result of better debt management within government structure, which is not the case in Chicago. So identifying risks in property tax is important, but I think more important is population and job growth. If you have population and job growth, you're going to be in a place where real estate will more than likely become more valuable.
Okay. Well, I think that's a great answer.
Yeah.
I'm curious because you watch those HGTV shows, and sometimes they do ones where it's like a couple and they're walking around. And I've seen a few of them where they're in Atlanta, and it always blows my mind because the couple's like, well, we were looking for a little bit more house, and like it's these like houses with 20-foot ceilings. They're like 3,000 square feet, and they're selling for like $150,000, and they're beautiful, like 10-year-old homes. Is that like a lot of Atlanta market, or is that just television just picking out a little tiny, subset of the market?
You typically are buying more house for the money in Atlanta. I did an episode on my podcast on gentrification, and I talk about some things on that episode that will constrain real estate pricing and work in favor if you already own property in those areas, or maybe you want to buy property in those areas. And things like the lake here in Chicago. So if you're not familiar with Chicago, we have Lake Michigan, and you can't see the other side. It's like an ocean. Sometimes there's 10-foot waves that they have to close down the road that runs, Lakeshore Drive because of the waves. But that large lake creates a natural boundary, a natural constraint to further development of the city of Chicago. And so there's upward pressure on, the downtown neighborhoods, not just because it's downtown, but it's similar to the New York City area where there's just no more space. We can't go out much more into, the ocean or into the river. These natural boundaries help to apply additional pressure on those markets. Whereas in Atlanta, there's not that same type of a physical natural boundary to constrain prices. Number one. Number two, the government, it's a younger city, it's a slightly younger city. But number two, the government is a little more conducive to approving projects and speeding through the permitting process, where it's more of a challenge in the Northeast and in Chicago, with construction costs being more expensive. Union strangleholds are a little bit more prevalent here and driving up the prices in Chicago and the Philadelphia, New York City type markets. But in Atlanta, there's no natural boundary on either the east or the west like you would find on a coastal city to constrain the prices. And for that reason, you'll have the land values just remaining cheaper, and it's easier to continue to have the urban sprawl just continue further and further and further outward. Because in a sense, Atlanta's not cut in half like that same circular shape would be if you were to plop that same 20-mile radius circle in downtown Chicago or downtown Philadelphia. There's even the rivers in Philadelphia, or downtown Manhattan in New York. Half the circle is going to be out in the water. And so that's part of the reason you'll see the prices go much higher in certain areas compared to somewhere like Atlanta, where they stay reasonably low price compared to what we're all used to in the rest of the country.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I never really thought of.
No, same. That's fascinating. That's crazy.
Yeah. So it's like supply and demand just from like a landmass.
Right. No, it's super interesting perspective. And so give me some insight on what you're doing when you go to a new market like Atlanta. Who are you looking to partner with? How do you find these people to partner with? What's the process there?
I mean, yeah, you have to have the right partner. I feel like for me, if almost all my business is done, like we have LLCs together and things like that. But a lot of what I've done has been on handshakes. And if I can't trust a partner, then I'm identifying. If I can't say like, okay, this person has whatever, probably usually when we get together, maybe like not a lot of money in the bank. They're not necessarily bankrupt, broke, and like, burning people for money, but they're also not setting the world on fire and super successful when we first meet. If I can't trust this person to take $100,000 of my money and go out of the country for a week, 2 weeks on vacation, and if I'm sleeping well while they're out of town with my 100,000 for those 2 weeks, that's a person that I can continue to be in business with. That's the level of trust I have. I trust my instinct about that person. Of course, I'm going to do some due diligence on that type of person before I get into that business. But for me, I foot the bill here at Diamond Equity Investments for the marketing, and our marketing budgets will exceed $100,000 in a month in certain markets. So I got to make sure that I really trust that person's commitment to the cause. And I think if anybody listening in to this episode right now also puts themselves in a position, you're going to put, a lot of money. It doesn't matter if you have one house or 100 houses. The price of a house, especially in another market, I mean, you're probably 30, 40,000. And if you're going to do a rehab on top of that, it's probably another 30 or 40. You're signing on a loan for, anywhere from 60 to 150 or several $100,000. So if it is somebody that's your boots on the ground there, you definitely have to make sure that you can trust that person. I don't really have a definitive answer or several series of hoops that I would have each person jump on. But as an example, if anyone was interested, they could Google REI Diamonds Austin Stack, and he is the partner in Atlanta. And we talk about exactly how we went through the process to select and identify him. But the short answer is that he added value to me. He would send me deals. He lived in Chicago, came in through my podcast, read my book, the one that was mentioned earlier in our episode here. And then he started trying to wholesale in Chicago. It didn't work out. He moved to Atlanta, and it was kind of the end of the story. But then, he's 23, 24 years old at the time. So this kid's sending me these deals like, hey, this seller wants to sell. Here it is. He wasn't trying to tit for tat or say like, yeah, if this deal closes, you got to pay me out X, Y, Z. There was like no negotiation there. He was just adding value every way that he could see fit. So if somebody came across his desk in Chicago that he felt like maybe could add value to me, he would make an introduction, he would make a connection, and then he would let it go. He was never looking for anything in return. And he honestly wasn't looking for anything in return. He sent me his entire buyer's list for Chicago. Hey, I'm not doing anything with this. Here, maybe you can. I picked the phone up. I called him. I had decided I liked Atlanta as a market to be in a little while before that. I had someone on my show, my podcast again. He was talking about the Atlanta market. He was talking about the demographic changes. And I decided I wanted to be in business there, which is like the first step is deciding which market. But then I knew that Austin was in Atlanta. So I hopped on the phone after that last value add with the buyer's list. And I'm like, hey, when are you coming to Chicago? He comes to Chicago. We do lunch. He brings his dad. His dad's a contractor in Chicago. He's trying to add additional value. Hey, my dad's a contractor. I want you to meet, blah, blah, blah. As he was seeing a friend of his at the time, this girl, she works in the attorney's office, and I'm trying to give her blah, blah, blah. So he was trying to continue to still make further introductions, but I had my own agenda that he had no knowledge of, and that was that we were going to be opening up the Atlanta market, and he was my guy. So that was kind of how I selected him. Like I mentioned, I don't have a selection process to duplicate that many, many more times. I'm a spiritual person. I believe in God. I believe that God puts the people in our life at the right time. Oftentimes, like, how am I going to play God and select the partner or think that, oh, God selected everyone? But sometimes I just feel it in my spirit. This person is the right person I'm supposed to be in business with. We're going to spend a lot of time together developing this business here. I don't get that feeling about every contractor, every person that brings me a deal, but certainly about Austin Stack, it was almost like the light opened up from heaven and shined on him, metaphorically, when we got into business. And we ramped up. We did $1 million in gross profit in the first 14 months that we were in the Atlanta market. So it seemed like it was hand selected from heaven.
Right. Yeah. It's awesome. It's an awesome story too. I mean, and it speaks a lot to it to say, that you trust your gut. That's a hard thing for a lot of people to do. So you sound like you got your stuff together, Dan.
Oh yeah. I'm blessed.
That's such an awkward finish to that sentence for Steve. Sounds like you got your stuff together, Dan.
Yeah, thank God. It wasn't always like that, So
Yeah.
it feels really nice to be at a place, to see my daughter's face. It was like a surprise. I went and got the condo. I rented it. I came out for Thanksgiving that year, and then dropped it on her after the deposit was paid for the rental condo that I moved into. Then when I got here, and this was a big deal for me because with my history, I'm scared. I can't even rent apartments. You guys do background checks. You guys probably wouldn't rent to me. And here I was getting this this really nice condo at a really, really great deal at the time. And to see my daughter's face as, she came into that condo for the first time and here's dad, he's living here and she's got her own room. And we've since bought a condo a little further up the lake with better views of the city and everything. So it's really, really a blessed place, a blessed position. Right. I'm so grateful to have such a strong team at Diamond Equity Investments and, on and on.
Well, I'm going to defend your statement that we may not have rented to you. I would say the landlords are the ones that make the decisions, but I think it goes to say that, a landlord that goes with their gut is going to rent to you. The past that you had wasn't anything that I think somebody can draw a nexus between and say, he might be a terrible tenant. But even still, somebody meets you, they get a sense for you. You know what I mean? For a lot of landlords, the background check is only, a small piece of the pie of the whole, pie itself. There's a lot of things that go into it. And I think a lot of landlords, the good landlords that are out there, know how to use one part data and then trust their gut at the end of the day. So it's I think that you got that in common with a lot of our listeners. I know that have been doing this a long time and have come to really rely on that and trust that. And you're doing the same thing and picking partners and, what areas to get in. So it's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things that I was kind of a takeaway for me from this podcast, and this has come up on other podcasts too. We had Marty Orfici, I think I'm saying that right, Orfici, on a podcast from Rent to Own Labs, and he's down in Tampa, I want to say, and he had talked about how his pain kind of turned into a passion for him, and he kind of was getting into nutrition and some stuff of that nature. But he does a lot of rent to own stuff, and it's interesting listening to your story how the pain point of being in Philly and needing to be in Chicago at the same time is kind of the thing that actually led to, opening up your possibilities of where you're going to invest. So you went from just Philadelphia to Chicago and other areas. And it's always interesting to listen to somebody's potential pain or something that might be going, not optimal for them at that point, and that actually turns into something that's actually a positive, and maybe was the thing that led you to being able to invest in so many different markets because you had to. Yeah,
you bring up a good point with that. I mean, it's definitely not fun to go through life's challenges, but it seems like the more I can try to just flip around and at least look for the opportunity. I have the condo that I'm in today. It's a very, very hard condo to get, but if it wasn't for the other landlord waking up and realizing that the rent was $1,000 below market or something and deciding to sell the unit, I never would have looked. And, the timing was perfect. The quality of life is way, way above that one. But that was not fun when I was informed I had to move out of that one. I'm sure there's a myriad of other situations that you can find a silver lining in. It makes life a lot easier.
Yeah. Well, to close things out, Dan, I thought of this earlier and I didn't want to ask you, and interrupt when you were talking earlier, but were you born in West Philadelphia?
Shooting some b-ball outside.
Yeah, were you born and raised in West Philadelphia? Come on, please tell me.
Oh man, that would have been cool. But we were right outside, so if I would walk to the end of my block and I would wade through this little creek, Darby Creek, then I was in West Philadelphia.
All right, West Philadelphia, born and raised. I like it. Just go with it. No one's going to call you out on
it. Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time for joining us on the podcast, Dan. I definitely learned some stuff, especially we were talking about with Atlanta and not, being landlocked. I'm like, it's awesome. So simple, but it makes so much sense.
I can't believe we've never heard anything like that before. It seems really common sense and not anything that should be secret hidden knowledge, but I swear to you, I've never heard of that before. It's fascinating. Yeah,
that was great. We always learn something from our guests. And for anybody interested in checking you out, Dan, they can I'm assuming on iTunes, wherever they listen to podcasts, they can look up REI Diamonds. Is that right?
Yeah, and also if you want to get a hold of the book, which was like my business plan, I wrote that in 2013, right before 2014 Chicago, and then extending to the other markets. Become a Wholesale Real Estate Master is available in a PDF version. It's 164 pages. It's not a teaser. I'm not selling the next level of coaching or anything. I don't do that. But you can go to reidiamonds.com, and if you put your email in there, you'll have that PDF within 5-10 minutes or so.
Awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And you guys, check out the podcast. Sounds like you've actually even connected with people, and that's how you even started that relationship with Austin down in Atlanta. So that's awesome to hear your podcast connecting you with business partners. It's so cool.
And get the free book.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Go get the free book right now.
It's free, people.
Yeah.
Do it. All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the episode. Dan, thanks again for being a guest. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Steve, Eric, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate the honor to have this time.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.
Take care.